What up, leaders? Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to bring you another video on business strategy. Remember I said this season, season 12, we're going to talk about business. This is a channel we talk about politics, economics, food and fun. Subscribers of this channel are called Raffalitos. This is Raffle Nation and we've just crossed 7,000 subscribers. It's been a long time, about 5 years coming, but we're there now. And thank you for all those who've subscribed. Remember to share this video, like and subscribe. And when you do that, you actually vote up the video so that YouTube tends to circulate those videos that get more likes and subscribes, and then they get more views and more subscribers, right? That unfortunately is how the YouTube algorithm works. So you can help this channel by subscribing. Remember, you can also now purchase merchandise, channel merchandise from my website, rnbrand.online, and soon you'll be able to do other business like invest in my real estate company. It's called EcoSmart Homes. It's at ecosmarthomes.rnbrand.online, and if you go to that website, lrdg.rnbrand.online, you'll see all the companies that I'm investing but today I'm going to talk about business strategy. Now this question comes from video comes from one of the questions that a number of commenters have asked, and that is, why doesn't Guyana pay off its debts? So the question is, now that Guyana is a rich country and has all this oil wealth and all this money coming in, why doesn't Guyana pay off its debt? Right? And there are some people who have very strong opinions on this. They said, well, Guyana should just pay off all its debts and then start over afresh. And I said, no, that's a bad idea. So this video attempts to answer that question. Why is it a bad idea for Guyana to pay off its debts? It is also going to talk about two forms of wealth, that is cash flow and equity, which is what you need to build a company, right? So I'm going to tie these two things together. That is why it's important for Guyana to maintain its debt rather than pay off its debt, and why cash flow and equity, or how cash flow and equity are important to use strategically in building a business and building a nation such as Guyana. So the first question is, why doesn't Guyana pay off all its debt? Guyana has about 1.5 billion US dollars in debt, right? Say 1.5 to $2 billion in debt. And the reason why I know that is because Guyana has a debt to GDP ratio of 50%. And that was back when the GDP was below $4 billion. Guyana's GDP in about 2016 was about $3.7 billion, and the debt to GDP ratio was about 50%. So Guyana owed less than $2 billion in debt. Now the GDP is closer to $8 billion a year. That is for this year, 2022, and it's going to double and so on as we go forward until it gets to like 70 billion in about 5 years. And I've already done a video about this. You can check one of the previous videos in which I talked about Guyana's future GDP growth, right? But why doesn't Guyana pay off? Why shouldn't Guyana pay off its debt? It's because you need cash flow and equity to build a company and build a nation, right? If you go to a bank and let's say you don't have any assets, they will not lend you money. Banks will only lend money to you if you have assets. And our $1 billion in cash reserves, that is in our sovereign wealth fund, is asset which can be used to borrow. In other words, we have access to capital at lower interest rates because we have a wealth fund that is over $1 billion, right? If you go to buy a house, they will not give you a house, let you buy the house unless you have a down payment, right? Unless you have income, unless you have cash flow, and you can put up about 20% so that you have equity in the house, right? So it's the same way. If we use the $1 billion that we have in our sovereign wealth fund to pay off our debts, what will happen is that we have no equity with which to assets with which to use to borrow money to build our infrastructure. In other words, we can maintain our debt and use our new assets to borrow against it so that we can build new infrastructure, right? That is how Singapore does it. For example, Singapore has a what, $400 billion economy now, but their debt to GDP ratio is about 1.5. So Singapore owes about $500 to $600 billion, right? Over $500 billion they owe. But if you look at the company, if you look at the country, Singapore, you don't see all this debt. What you see is a well-developed, very efficient country. You don't see that they are carrying about $600 billion in national debt, right? In the same way, if they had paid off all their debt, they would not be able to borrow. They wouldn't have the assets with which to borrow. They wouldn't have been able to build all of the infrastructure they've built, the train lines, the buildings, you know, even the government infrastructure, institutions. They wouldn't have the money to do that unless they had borrowed and they used that as collateral to borrow more money, right? So in the same way, Guyana can't pay off all its debts because we need that capital in our sovereign wealth fund to use as assets, to borrow against that, to use it to get money from the banks to build infrastructure. So that provides us equity, right? It needs to sit there either in the sovereign wealth fund or be invested in other income producing assets, perhaps real estate, perhaps some company stocks, but it cannot be used to pay off the debt because that money is our equity, our assets to be used to borrow against from the banks. And that's exactly how a business works, right? So Guyana has to be operated the way we operate a business. In the case right now, for example, I am building a real estate company. I explained this, EcoSmart Homes. The first project is getting off the ground. It's going to be a 10-story building. It's going to have 20 units. It's going to have a parking garage. It's going to have a built-in grocery store. It's going to have laundromat facilities and dining facilities and cafeteria facilities. It's going to have entertainment facilities and recreational facilities, a pool and all of that in this multi-story apartment complex or condominium complex. But the bank has already told me that they're only going to lend up to 50% of that, of the cost, the construction cost, which means that I have to find the other 50%. In other words, I have to find 50% of the money to construct the complex. Now that has to come from cash flow, right? So the bank may be able to use equity, that is when the building is completed, they may be able to use the building as equity. The same way, for example, you go to buy a house, you get a 30-year mortgage, you put down 20% and then they take the house, they give you a note. In other words, bank owns your house and you're paying a mortgage for 30 years, right? So the fact is that your bank will not lend you money unless you can produce cash flow, because you can show cash flow, and unless you can show that you have equity or you have some asset against which to borrow. And in the case of real estate, which is a special case, the house itself is the asset which the bank uses, but you still need to cover 20% down in equity, right? You need to provide equity in the amount of 20% down, right? It's the same reason why, for example, if you've had a mortgage for a number of years, you don't pay off your mortgage. Why? Because you know that your 3% mortgage is money in the bank. In other words, if you were to take that money that you would use to pay down your mortgage and you put it on the stock market, you probably will earn more than the 3% that the bank is charging you, right? So the same reason Guyana cannot pay off its debts, because right now, or because we have assets, because we have $1 billion wealth fund, we can borrow at perhaps 1 or 2 or 3%. Now the interest rates are rising, maybe it's going to go up to maybe 4 or 5%, but we can borrow at a lower interest rate than we can earn, and we can earn more, a higher interest. We can earn a higher interest if we use our assets, we invest our assets, right? So this is actually just a basic monetary strategy. The reason why Guyana shouldn't pay down its debt is because the cash that we have in the bank is worth more if it's invested than if we use it to pay down the debt, and then we have no more money to borrow against. In other words, we have no assets to borrow against. We need to maintain our assets. We use that as collateral, and we need to maintain our debts to service our debts. So that's it, guys. The strategy is you need cash flow and you need equity, right? These are the two forms of wealth you need, and you need to maintain a balance. That is, you need to maintain your cash flow should be sufficient to cover your debts, that's the debt payments, and maintain your, in this case, infrastructure, your building, your real estate, right? And the same way you would treat your real estate building, reason why you wouldn't pay off your mortgage is the reason why Guyana shouldn't pay off its debts. Hope you understand this. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. What do you think about this strategy? There are lots of people on the one hand who are saying that Guyana should pay off all its debts. I, on the other hand, think that Guyana needs to service its debts. And the reason is we need to maintain cash flow and equity. Oil now gives us cash flow and allows us to build equity. And we need to use those equity, the assets that we create in our sovereign wealth fund as collateral to cover, in other words, to get more money to build our infrastructure. That is the strategy I used to build my companies, and that is the strategy Guyana should continue to use to build this nation. And that is completely independent of politics. It's not PPP or PNC strategy, it's just business strategy. Leave a comment below, tell me what you think about this business strategy. If you have a different opinion, or if you have the same, share the same opinion, let us discuss it in the comments below. Share this video with friends and family. Let us know how you manage cash flow and equity and assets, and share this video with friends and family around the world. Let people know what's happening here in Georgetown, Guyana. Later.